The UK has always come out pretty much on top of all the surveys of tolerance and diversity and a good, safe, pretty good place to live. We had a big problem with ISIS extremists a few years ago, but we managed to tackle that. And thanks to Donald Trump and others in America, ISIS, until recently, has been kept very firmly back in its box and not been able to commit the same outrages. But I certainly didn't get a sense that all the Muslims in Britain were racing to be part of ISIS. They weren't. The extremists, as they are in every religion, are the exception, not the norm. And it's a pretty perilous road we go down if we start to say, well, the whole Muslim community is at fault here, which, by the way, Tommy Robinson has said, after the 7/7 bombings a few years ago on the buses and the underground system here, a heinous series of 4 terror attacks in London. Tommy Robinson went up and basically accused all Muslims of being complicit, all of them, and later retracted it. But that's why when I say Tommy Robinson is an Islamophobe, I don't think he doesn't hide it. He might deny it, but he doesn't hide it from his own rhetoric. He is somebody that despises Islam and believes that all Muslims were to blame when there were terrorist attacks by extremists in London. And I think that is dangerous rhetoric. So I think that there is a conversation.
Well, it's clearly dangerous.
It's
clearly dangerous.
The conveation has to be nuanced.
And
it has to be careful. Would you accept that?
I agree. Well, let's take absolutely. That's for sure. I mean, let's take it apart a little bit more. Then, I mean, first of all, there are reasons that the authorities were afraid to act in the manner that they should have. Now, they were afraid partly because they would be pilloried by their confreres on the radical left, because the progressives are very good at reputation savaging their own. But they're also afraid of a Islamic fundamentalist backlash and the murderousness that might accompany that. So there's a reason they're afraid. And Piers, you also didn't address my issue, and I'm not accusing you of anything. I don't expect you to have the answers because this is too complex. But the fact that only 3 of 50 Muslim majority polities in the world, states, are democratic, even approximating democratic, it's like, what the hell are we to make of that exactly? Like, look, first of all, you pointed to the fact that there are psychopathic sadists, dark tetrad types, right? Machiavellian, narcissistic, psychopathic, and sadistic. That's the constellation of personality traits. And that's a human constant. It's about 3 to 5% of the population. And that's independent of race and ethnicity. So, like, there's no shortage of bad actors. And you're right to point to that rape case in France. There were 75,000 people in the chat groups associated with that rape case, fantasizing about doing exactly the same sort of thing to their wives or to someone else's wife. There's no bottom to the darkness of the human soul. And the bloody progressives tend to be absolutely blind to that fact. Now, so you can't point to the Muslims, let's say, and say, well, that's where all the psychopaths are, because clearly that's not the case. But that does still it still allows this other can of worms to remain uninvestigated, which is, so 100% of Protestant or Catholic majority countries outside of Africa are highly functional democracies. 100%. 6% of Muslim majority countries are democracies, and they're not in the highly functional category.
But do they want to be democracies, But Jordan, do they actually want to be democracies? I mean, we have a slightly quaint view in places like the UK that we are the exemplar for how a country should operate. When I was in Qatar, for example, for the World Cup, the Football World Cup, I met some of the high-ranking Qataris, including people who were related to the Emir, and they were kind of laughing at the idea that they would look at the UK as a template for how a society should exist, with our knife crime, our drug abuse, our
it's
drunkenness.
easy to say that.
I'm throwing it back at you. They were genuinely bemused. They were genuinely bemused that we would think here that somehow the way our country operates is the exemplar that they should be adopting.
Okay, well, so this is what I would say to that is, first of all, you're right, but that also makes the problem that I'm addressing in some ways are bringing to light even more stark, because it isn't necessarily the case that the denizens of the Islamic world look to progressive Western democracies as the ideal. But that turns out to be a problem if you're importing them en masse, because their fundamental predisposition might not be democratic, and yet they're in a democratic society.